Welcome, everyone, to The Goddess Within. My name is Michelle, and I'm an astrologer and the voice behind Astrology with Michelle, both on YouTube and on my website, astrologywithmichelle.com. I am predominantly what I would call an intuitive evolutionary astrologer. My primary teachings and viewpoints come predominantly from Jeffrey Wolf Green and the teachings of evolutionary astrology. However, I always reserve the little caveat that I don't call myself an evolutionary astrologer because so much of what I do is instigated from a process of channeling the present moment through the natal chart. And really what that has revealed to me is that there is information in the chart and an evolutionary process that's underway in the life of the soul that, I see, I feel, I hear. Sometimes I receive messages, sometimes stories come. If you've watched my week ahead, that is my weekly channeling, and I never know what I'm going to say and I never know what's going to come out. And it's what works for me to really access information that is from beyond what my mind could think to say about things. And so sometimes things that I say will reference the fact that I've also studied Hellenistic astrology, ancient astrology, modern astrology, Vedic astrology, Western astrology, and I have a Gemini moon, so I sort of osmose all of it through my own personal lens. And I continue to come back to the soul and the bottom line teachings of Jeffrey Wolf Green as it relates to the soul emanating from source, the desires that we carry as a soul, the bottom line desire to return to source, which I believe is love. I believe that we come from that love, we return to that love, that we shed through experience the blocks to that love. We shed conditioning, whether it's from our childhood, our family patterns, karmic dynamics in relationship, and then it's all this ongoing process of learning to love. And a lot of my work focuses around the transits of Venus and Mars and Pluto. But I incorporate the asteroid goddesses. And when I first, I taught a similar class series on the goddesses a few years ago. And I realized with Venus's new phase in Aquarius that this is precisely the right time to begin re-emerging into an understanding of the goddesses in a new evolutionary context. This is neither masculine nor feminine. You don't have to have any particular gender, identity, or sexual orientation. This evolution happens within all of us. We are all collectively woven into the evolutionary fabric of, the soul journey. And we share that often in relationship with others. And I have a particular perspective as a female-bodied person, but I don't think that everybody has Venus and Mars in their charts somewhere. Everybody has, it's like we can't identify a planet with a gender, but the goddesses hold this particular frequency of the feminine. And a part of what has happened in our collective history is that the stories of ancient Greece and ancient Rome about these women have been told and retold for hundreds of thousands of years through a patriarchal lens and through a particular distortion that has continued to perpetuate a remembering around the feminine that isn't seeing clearly the evolutionary intention of these asteroids and of these goddesses. And so part of what I'm inviting in this class series is a reconnecting of that which is within us, within each and every one of us. And in that reconnection, a new vision and understanding and evolutionary journey that we can take over the course of this year to really understand how this evolution plays out in our own lives. Because in my own experience and the way my classes go, I do a transmission on the archetype, the energies, I do a transmission on the chart itself, and then we get into chart practice. And I choose not to use celebrities and dead people. I use either the chart of the present moment, because that chart holds everyone and everything under the cosmos, or I use the chart of an individual, a soul that I can actually relate to, where I can reflect things and get real-time direct information as to the resonance and the reality of that soul and what they're experiencing and what they're healing and what they're evolving and what they're growing in their life. And I do that in a container of inclusion, belonging, and unconditional love, right? So everything is welcome here. All of you is welcome here. All levels of learning. You don't have to know a lot about astrology. I move very quickly sometimes. So all the recordings in my classes are provided so that you can go back and re-listen to things. And there is really an open space for in my class containers for people to participate in the way that they feel called. So that can be staying completely anonymous. No one ever sees your face or hears your voice. And you just have the safety of receiving these transmissions and learning and integrating it in your own life. Or it can be really revealing, bringing up your own chart, working with your own chart in our class containers, and really being able to experience the benefit of real-time direct coaching and practice and work with your chart with me. And some of my students are here. If there's anyone who feels like called to share their experience of how that is for them at the end, send me a little heart or give me a little something, and I'll, wow, no pressure at all whatsoever. So we're going to begin with just going through the goddesses. And I'm starting this series with, monthly classes, just looking at one goddess per month and her transit, her archetype, the evolutionary journey relative to her. But what we're going to do throughout the whole cycle is we are going to relate her also back to Venus. Because, all of the goddesses have different orbits, and they have, and some of them will be pretty much in the same sign for most of the year. But Venus is the one who's going to circle all the way around and meet everyone. So as we go along through this series, we'll be meeting Venus relative to that goddess. And I've intentionally designed the schedule of the class series in the months as they unfold to relate each one to the other, and so that they're together, basically, during that time. And so that we get to learn both at a core and fundamental level about Venus in that sign and her relationship to that goddess and that energy. Thank you. Yeah, wonderful. All right. So we're starting with Venus, right? And we have the painting of Venus, born of the sea, and this archetypal feminine goddess of beauty. She's pictured naked, right? So, but look at it, she's covering herself. She's covering her breast, right? Which is nourishment. And she's covering her yoni, which is like sexuality, sexual connection, divine connection. It's the portal of birth and death. And so we, with the Venus archetype, what's evolving relative, and Venus, if you think about her in the natal chart, Venus rules the signs of Libra and Taurus. Taurus pertains more to that physical, sensual aspect of Venus, right? the voluptuous breasts and the belly, here, and the beautiful dress and the physical embodiment of pleasure, right? But it's pleasure unto oneself. Taurus is often a sign that does a lot of solo tending, self-possession, self-pleasure, self-care, can be a strong element of the Taurus archetype. And it's oriented to what feels good in the nature, in the natural, right? And in the natural environment, that is the food that we eat, the beauty of flowers, our physical environment, but it's also the money that we make, our resources, our physical, tangible resources. It's earth. One of the first elements of capitalism is the commodification of resources and how we have commodified and objectified the body. And it is one of the areas within the feminine archetype where we are healing this objectification of women that says you have to look a certain way in order to be loved and be lovely. You have to have the physical adornments and the things in order to be worthy of value. And if we think about in the ancient times, which is not so far off from our current incarnation, a woman was a possession. She was a possession of her father until she became a possession of her husband. And there was something degrading if she was not married or didn't bear children or didn't, the value of a woman was diminished if she was single and sovereign unto herself, except for the Virgo women, right? And we'll talk about the Virgo women when we get to Juno, and to the archetype of the Virgin and the Vestal Virgin, also Vesta. But so this objectification of women, of course, has led to all these different shadow elements, which is the opposition to Taurus is Scorpio, right? The shadow of sexuality, our reproductive systems, shame, where we are, where we have not been in right relationship with our sexual energy, where sexual energy has been misused or abused. And the healing of the feminine is really to be able to embody the beauty and the grace of that, while shedding the evolutionary conditions of possession, of objectification, of, devaluing ourselves, valuing ourselves based on our money, our capacity to make money or be productive, or a sort of the commodification of our bodies, all these things, the identification with being beautiful, and thus like seeming like, oh, this woman's beautiful, so she's worthy of love, she's worthy of partnership, she's worthy of adoration. But if I don't perceive myself as objectively beautiful, I'm doomed to be alone. And it's like, that's such a ridiculous idea or belief system. Every single human being on this planet is worthy of love, like is born, from the perspective, from a whole-minded perspective. We're all going to be expressions of this divine incarnation into this physical body. And we get to, with Venus, begin to have a new relationship to our value and our value system, to the system of valuing ourselves and each other. And so much of this with Venus and Aquarius right now will be, activated based on that polarity point of Leo, which is our individual creative self-expression. How are we sovereign unto ourselves and uniquely creative beings in a collective of humankind, right? And deconditioning our ideas about what's beautiful. And I love Aquarius for being like weird and funky and quirky, unique. Unique is a great word. for Aquarius, because the uniqueness is really holding that every single human being that's born onto this planet is a unique expression of the divine. No two are exactly the same, even identical twins. Those souls will have different charts and different soul paths. And yet at the same time, we share in a human experience, which is also very different, where we can be so different. And that expression can take so many different ways. So, we'll be working with Venus as she goes around and she touches on several other goddesses. So I work, and at the end I'll get to the chart of the present moment so you can see some of the different facets that I'm going to incorporate. But one of the main goddesses that I work with are the relatives of Jupiter. So Pallas Athene is Jupiter's daughter, and she's similar to the goddess Artemis. She has this element of the nature and the natural intelligence. And she's said to be born of the mind of Jupiter, right? So she's a woman who possessed masculine intelligence or natural intelligence and a relationship to nature. And, when we think about our own inherent wisdom, part of what I've been really starting to recognize is the reclaiming of our own indigenous wisdom. This is our relationship to what we know that comes through knowing, that just comes through knowing. This is not, oh, you know this because you learned this in a book. This is you know this because when you went out into the forest and you were in contact with the animals and you had a direct experience of the environment, you received information and it landed inside you, and you had a natural awareness, an intuitive capacity to just receive that information and trust it. Right? So that a part of what Jupiter's daughter does is she trusts her natural intelligence, and that's a sub set of that Jupiter archetype, where Sagittarius, we have the freedom and the spaciousness, the expansion to receive direct guidance and wisdom and be able to apply it, right? And where that kind of wisdom is judged or determined to be something that, only belonged to the, like in the ancient days, only men were hunters, only men were thinkers. Oh, wow, beautiful. Yeah. When we get into each of the classes, we'll be able to get into chart practice where we can look at things like a goddess conjunct the south node. That's really fun, like looking at the whole evolutionary intention of that in relationship both to Venus and to everything else in the chart, right? Everything's in context to our particular soul journey. But if we have planets, and in particular, if we have asteroid goddesses on the nodes or on Pluto, these are very significant. Where they're taking prominent expression in relationship to that archetype. So like conjunct the sun, right? In expression to our solar archetype, and then in the sign in the house that they belong in. And we'll go through all of that in the class series so that we can really start to see this in our own lives, within our own charts, so that we know, oh yeah, this is how this is coming to life for me. Because if we imagine that we are just souls continuing to come together again and again through this evolutionary journey, one of the things that we're doing is reclaiming ancient information that is inside of us. Ancient information. Like if your great, great, great grandmother had information in her about herbs and medicines, and and a part of what happened for us developmentally is that the women who had this intuitive knowledge, the women who were, so many of the ancient astrologers were men. However, there are many, many stories of their daughters In fact, there's one prominent ancient astrologer, I'm forgetting her name right now, but she was the daughter of a famous, she had to learn math and science and calculations, all the things that typically only men would learn. And it was practically forbidden for her to have this knowledge, but she did. And she was one of the most prolific astrologers of her time. She far surpassed her father's work in her way of being, but she was not, necessarily recognized as such until many, many years later. But again, it's like if we have ancestral connections to very inherent natural knowledge, this can also be pointing to where we are reclaiming that intuitive wisdom, where we are reclaiming that which had not been given permission for us to know something, to know what we know, and also healing the discord of where people question intuitive knowing, like where also, and particularly to the feminine archetype, where women were crucified, burned, persecuted, and had to really hide this part of themselves in order to be safe in the world. So it's like, as we reclaim these ancient ways within our modern lives, as we reconnect ourselves with this natural intelligence, it will reveal things to us about our path, and in particular about the journey of the soul as it relates to what we're here to teach too. Right? Jupiter was the teacher. And so if you think of Pallas Athena as his daughter, and learning from Jupiter, learning and being given permission by her father to really know what she knows and be herself and not conform, right, to the ideas of the feminine that had previously, then she was free. No, I'm not saying the conjunction means persecution. I'm just speaking in general of the persecution of women. We could, from Joan of Arc to the witch burnings to, the cancel culture, the persecution of people in the public and it particularly of women. 11th house. Yeah, I don't know if I would associate the persecution. That could be relative to groups of people, like where the mob mentality, 11th house Aquarius, where the community persecutes someone, an individual. But persecution couldn't just be associated to the 11th house. We can experience persecution, alienation in any house, I think. So we can experience the suppression of our own internal wisdom within our family system, right? And the 4th house could relate to like being the black sheep within a family and having all these intuitive gifts and capacities, and being told right away that like that's dangerous, that you shouldn't talk about those things, right? Whereas when I was a little girl, my mom did one thing, which was like she really highlighted the fact of my intuitive wisdom. And I think that gave me a lot more safety and permission to later in my life be able to claim that for myself. But there's still the vulnerability. I feel it every day whenever I'm on YouTube, of like whatever I channel and whatever comes through me could potentially kill me, And so many of my mentors and people that I love and respect, they choose to be anonymous on YouTube and not reveal their identity for that safety and for the protection of the privacy of their own lives. I've chosen not to do that and to continue to live and evolve within the vulnerability of that, and use it as a means for my own evolutionary growth. And it's definitely something I'm learning about all the time. So. Ceres is the next goddess, and she is the mother goddess. And she's in the archetypal story, she's the mother of Persephone, and She is the goddess of the grain and the agriculture. She relates to mother-daughter relationships and the loss of that mother-daughter relationship. You know, in that story, Pluto, there's two versions of the story, and I love that. Of course, I'm sure there could be many more versions, but two that I have heard is that Pluto kidnaps her daughter, takes her down into the underworld, and then her daughter has to go through all these tests in order to reemerge. And during that time, she declares winter on Earth. She says to Pluto, I'm going to starve the people until you release my daughter. The other version of the story is that Persephone volunteers herself and makes the sacrifice of herself and goes down into the underworld. And there's like the pain and the longing of the mother being separated from the child, right? And this relationship, this bond between mother and daughter is, mother and child in general, is one of the most powerful and profound relationships. It's also the relationship between ourself and the earth, the physical earth that we live on. And we notice in our culture, we are content to destroy the earth and extract from it its resources in exchange for wealth and possession without concern of what it's doing to humanity. There's exploitation of children, but there's also like the very basic bond of the mother and the child, which has been fundamentally disturbed, both from the birth process, that women have been separated from their inherent, the naturalness of birth itself. Like birth is a natural phenomenon, but it's been medicalized and industrialized so that women believe that they actually don't have the power to give birth to a baby without the help of a doctor or a hospital or a medical institution, without painkillers, but there's a whole movement, that's happening in the free birth movement of women reclaiming their power to birth and healing the connection to birth, healing the connection to their own bodies. There's also a deep need in the mother-daughter relationship and the mother-son relationship for a deep healing and the reclaiming of that, where power, where extraction, where capitalism, where all of those things have really, really harmed those relationships. There's a book called Mother Hunger, which I have referenced before, which talks about, the attachment wounding that happens when we grow up with a mother who is disconnected from us, right? And whether that happened because our mother was emotionally unavailable, physically unavailable, whether there was abuse in the family, whether there was, whatever was happening to create that, we have such a profound opportunity in this time, in this evolutionary cycle, to heal those relationships. And I've done a lot of readings for mothers who have been estranged from their children, where and really see the themes that come with the series, you know, uh, this our core capacity to be nourished. Like if we weren't breastfed as a child, if we didn't receive that basic love and connection and nourishment, right? We might be starving for affection, for love and connection. And one of the things I've been studying lately is this idea around frozen needs, which is very much a Ceres concept of like when that nourishment and care and connection has been taken away from us at a very early age, the needs for that, which are very normal, basic needs, between a mother and son, between a mother and daughter, right? Yeah, and capitalistic and patriarchal wounding and conditioning definitely perpetuates that, right? And that becomes it's one of the most sacred bonds that we can have. I did a ceremony last night, and in my prayers, like I was praying for information about love and healing with my children. I just received this vision of my son, who's about 10 years old, and how deeply what the message I received was that he needs to see your face right now. He's at this age where it's becoming very fun and exciting for him to play video games. And while he's playing with other kids online, other people, even other adults, it's with a screen and a cartoon, and there's violence and all of that, and it's like deeply concerns my soul. But yet at the same time, he's a very deeply tender soul, and he needs to see and know my face and my connection and my love more than ever, because that is a direct contradiction to the reality, right? And this I think pertains more to the Mars in Aquarius, AI, Pluto in Aquarius, but the Ceres connection is healing that mother wound, between mother and son, healing that mother wound between mother and daughter, and healing that deep care and nourishment that we need, that touch, food, survival, care, connection, human touch is a basic need. It's not a hierarchy need, it's a basic need. So what the baby needs when it's born, we need through our whole life. The baby needs that breastfeeding, that basic nourishment and connection, which includes both the nourishment of the food source and the connection to the being that gave it life, right? As we become older and more individuated, right, into a scene, Ceres also has this teenage element, because her daughter was older when it's happening, when the Persephone story is happening, right? So the teenage girl, right? When I was a teenager, I went through this huge rebellion towards my mother, and ran away from home and could not have a relationship of connection with my mother. The core wounds of that time were deeply activated, right? But a part of what's healing in that reconnection is that we're reconnecting to our own source, to the source that gave us life, right? And to the source of nourishment, right? And then the father relationship also comes into that, I know that I'm going to go through that in the series class. We'll be looking at the Capricorn evolution, because it is a very important part of this cycle. I think what that will do to breaking down that patriarchal capitalistic conditioning around, the earth and our core, where the foundations, the structures of our core source of nourishment. More and more people these days are having nutritional deficiencies, health issues, health challenges related to eating poor food, not just non-organic, but packaged, commodity, our food source. We don't have a relationship with our food source. And to have to go all the way back, I see a whole movement of people who are moving back towards homesteading, growing their own food, being reliant, on the earth, and having a relationship with the earth and relationship with the animals, and breaking free of the capitalism, which also means that they're getting off of the pharmaceuticals, and they're getting off of all the things that would, it takes a lot to eat well. And most people, you're right, don't have the time or money to do that. But that is because capitalism has created a mechanism for instant gratification and for separation from our resources. The actuality of what the earth grows food, fruit, provides all the resources totally freely. It was never possessed, and there's the Taurus element. And so now capitalism has possessed that and can put a label on it and charge a lot of money for the thing that was naturally given freely. And ancient cultures understood that, and they had a relationship to taking care of the earth, and their whole life and rhythm was very slow and very deeply connected to that. But what we've had to do is work very hard, Capricorn, in order to sustain a life and a lifestyle Like you have to be really, really wealthy in order to afford all the things that it would take, right? But if you're, organic, basic food growing from a garden, farm to table food should be not a luxury, but a basic human, a thing. And obviously, this is all a part of the healing and the evolutionary journey of these things, right? How do we shed these structures and change and share, because the earth shares its resources freely with us before it was commoditized, right? And yeah, so anyway, that's Ceres and the deep healing there. And then we have Juno. Juno is the goddess of marriage and commitment. She was the wife of Jupiter. She was hailed to be like a goddess amongst the goddesses. And she represents this, commitment and loyalty to a relationship. And in the story, Jupiter is a philanderer and he had all these illicit affairs and relationships with other women. And there was a lot of jealousy, and she took her jealousy out on other women instead of on Jupiter as a way to like subvert, but she maintained her commitment in the marriage despite herself, despite, without a knowing of who she truly was. And where Juno is in Virgo right now, retrograde, right? That's a very significant transit, and it's a big part of her transits for the year ahead. I've really seen this as, especially amongst women, and mostly because mostly women come to me, not to say that this isn't happening for men, but looking at these long-term committed relationships where we've sacrificed ourselves in the stability of the connection and what it provides, while feeling the deprivation and the longing for something, for a different experience. And where we've made marriage and commitment to be about this, I do forever, but our partner or the counterpart is not meeting us in the evolutionary journey. And so there's a real loss and a grief and, a discernment, and it brings up this existential crisis and doubt of like, is true love really possible? I feel so many people calling for like this deep and divine soul union, a marriage of two equals. The Vesica Pisces is one of my favorite symbols, and I paint it on a lot of my paintings. It's a symbol of the two wedding rings, overlapping one another. But it's like in the Vesica Pisces, it's this overlapping of two whole, complete, individual circles. And they come together and they create a center together that is a blending of the two of them and a union, right? But it is not taking away from their wholeness. It is creating a new center from their wholeness. And this goes against all the perceptions of like, I married my better half, or, looking for someone to complete me, It's like saying, I am complete and I'm coming together with my equal. And Jupiter and Juno are divine counterparts, right? They came together in the sky, in Leo, right? Or in Aries. Yeah, in Aries, in this last cycle. In Aries. So it was very much, we're coming together in union, but to our own individual path, right? And they were coming together relative to the North Node moving into Aries as well. So we've been following in my last class series, Venus and Mars coming around, but I always deeply follow Juno. We started that class series with Juno and Venus in their conjunction in Leo, which was last September. That conjunction seeded the core degrees of the Venus retrograde. You know, all of these questions that we have in our partnerships, in our relationships, whether it's being in a marriage, in a long-term marriage, and longing for a different experience and questioning whether or not to leave, and what can I at this age and stage of my life find love? Can I, if I leave this financial security and stability of my own family system, am I going to be able to find what I deeply desire in another person, right? In another relationship? And also the question of fidelity and what that is to be relating as a level of equals, right? Jupiter's infidelity was a reflection of the emotional dishonesty happening in the core archetypal dynamic, where in relationship to the masculine, and this happens a lot unintentionally and intentionally by women, where we're emasculating the male counterpart, where they feel that their freedom to be themselves is limited. And so dishonesty seeds in the relationship as a need to protect the part that has to be free, that has to be themselves. Whereas we're moving evolutionarily into a commitment of equals, where we are free to be ourselves, where we are free. And every human being, bottom line, I think on some level, wants to be known and to be loved and be accepted as they are, with whom they are. And that gives total freedom to love, right? That gives the basis of unconditional love in union and in relationship. And this is a core dynamic that, you know, we'll be seeing the dynamic of marriages and partnerships and core commitments and what we're committed to, right? With Juno and Virgo, this is also a commitment to our service, to our responsibility, and to healing where we have been in guilt. You know, one of the messages I received is that wherever an agreement is made that elicits guilt, something is not right. Right? So we can't make commitments and agreements that hold us to being in a position of becoming guilty or being guilty. Right? We want to be held in that purity and innocence of our relationship to self and other, so that we can be ourselves and be committed. And I feel like so much of what we're going to be exploring with Juno is that, you know, dissolving jealousy, dissolving, what is it to dissolve long-term relationships and begin anew? And I think that happens irregardless of whether or not you actually leave the relationship, or whether the relationship changes form, right? Many people in the cycles of also Saturn relative to the relationship will go through stages of evolution in that commitment. And, you know, in some traditions, they have a renewal of vows every year. I think it's such a fresh thing to like come together and say we commit to each other for a cycle, you know, or if we're committing together to a lifetime, right? Committing to the truth of love, right? Making a commitment to the truth of love and our union with God and one another, as learning how to love one another, which might very well mean that aspects of the relationship or the individual are meant to evolve. And where most relationships in their long-term commitment break down is where one person is in a stage of evolution and the other person is not able to meet them in that evolutionary stage. And that's not to say that anyone is bad or wrong for that. It's just, you know, in order for two souls to really come together in terms of evolving a karmic dynamic together, both souls have to be choosing through their free will. That's what Jeffrey Wolf Green, he defines a different distinction between soulmates and karma mates. And the main distinction between that is the consent of the two souls to evolve together as a spiritual commitment to their evolution versus one soul evolving, right? We can evolve through the karmic dynamics in relationship. We can stay a very long time in a relationship that is karmically evolving us, where the other soul is not on a spiritual level consenting to that evolution, but we are on a spiritual path of evolution with that other soul. So neither one is, wrong or bad. It's just different. It's just different ways of being. Then we have Vesta, who is the goddess of the sacred flame, the home and the hearth, but it was originally the temple, right? And the Vestal virgins. Ari Moshe actually did a interview with a woman who is a historian on the Vestal virgins, which is on his YouTube channel. I might be able to find that and put a link to it where they were talking about this. And Vesta is, I named my dog Vesta. She's like the goddess of the home. And that to me, she's one of my favorite expressions of the divine feminine in this original incarnation of the way that the feminine worked and the way that the feminine tended, right? If you think of the Vestal virgins, I think of it as relating to the sign of Virgo. Purity, chastity. They were women who belonged to themselves, which was unique in that time and culture because, like I was saying earlier, most women belonged to their father until they belonged to another man. And these women belonged to themselves and were in charge of the keeping of the temple, of the lighting of the sacred flame, and of the path of initiation, sacred initiation. And so in terms of this evolution, where we are really being invited both to tend our sacred calling, Vesta by transit can also relate to changes in the home and the sanctuary and the place and the temple and the space, but it's also in our relationship to our core calling. And, as a part of this class series, you'll receive an ephemeris, which is a listing of all the transits. So we'll go through, really identifying where all these, each and every one of these goddesses will go through each the planetary transits and how that relates to our own evolutionary journey. But right now, Vesta is in the sign of Gemini. So she's ruled by Mercury, and Mercury's in Pisces. And I really do think that a lot of this has to do with our sacred connection to the divine. These women were channels of the divine. They were oracles. They held information and knowledge, and they tended a light which was kept going all of the time so that people could know that they could go to the temple, they could pray, they could receive fire, receive light, receive illumination. And these women were there and they were pure and holy unto themselves, even if they weren't physically virgins, right? Although there's the virginal quality of that. They were priestesses of, and they belonged to themselves. And so there's something about our returning to our divine identity, returning to our connection to that divinity, to where we tend the flame. I'm always, whenever you see me on camera, it's like I always light the flame. It's always up here. I'm tending the flame. I clear the sanctuary before I do ceremony anytime, whether it's in my home, if our family is celebrating Shabbat or having people over, or if we're having a ceremony, if I'm leading a class or a group, I clear the temple. I Virgo, I clean the altar. I clear the thing. I light the candle. I set, and to open to what wants to come through that is holy. And in Shabbat, in the Jewish tradition, the Sabbath begins on the lighting of the candles and the saying of a prayer, saying of a blessing, right? That is a Vesta. In the word means to kadosh, to separate, right? And it's not separation, but it's so much, it's discernment. It's really taking the moment to see this is sacred. This is holy. And a part of what we're reclaiming in this archetype is the reclaiming of our sacred space, the reclaiming of our sacred identity, the reclaiming of our purity, our innocence. And that's a core part of the path of forgiveness. If we're looking at the Virgo Pisces axis, when I went on my pilgrimage, I received a blessing from the priest, and it was sort of absolving me, clearing the state, restoring my wholeness, my holiness through this prayer, through this prayer of pardon and forgiveness. Now, in our modern days, we can bring this into our daily life by tending the sacredness of our vessel, by reconnecting with our light, our purpose, by reconnecting with our prayer, our devotion. She is going to reflect our core devotion. And it's a part of us that's healing because the whole archetype of the sinner and the saint, the virgin and the slut, the martyr, there's like deeper layers of where we've lost, we've even lost touch with the sacred rhythms of rest. And the Sabbath is one of those rhythms of rest that, puts an end to the busyness of life and reconnects us through lighting the candles and saying a prayer to the sacredness of a moment, which is always, right? Everything is sacred. All life is sacred. And we live in a culture and a world and a system that doesn't revere that. And there's so much of the suffering in the Jewish tradition. A lot of the holidays are around the destruction of the temple, right? And this calling for the rebuilding of the temple, this calling for this reconnection to ourselves and to our sacred purpose and our devotion to life itself. So there's a lot that we'll explore there. There's one other goddess that I didn't mention here, and there are a couple other goddesses that I will incorporate. And so, in this class series, I've designed it to be a monthly class series. Each class is 2 hours. It's devoted to a transmission, and then transits, evolutionary themes, evolutionary cycle, but then the bulk of it will be our chart practice time, where we're really looking at working with these archetypes and the evolution within our lives, our own life stories, and what we're working with. Hygeia is the first goddess that we will begin with, and she's the goddess of health and healing and well-being. She's currently transiting through the sign of Pisces. And, there's a lot that's healing and relative to our collective pain body and the ways in which we are really deeply suffering physically. I've seen a lot of people with this Hygeia in Pisces dealing with long-term pain or struggles with chronic pain, or a lot of it having to do with Saturn pain, and I think there's so much, when we connect to the archetype of healing. This is the sign of the caduceus, right? It's what the medical model should be representing right? A restoration of our health, but unfortunately, the medical model has been unable to really restore people to health. It's it's created a lot of pain medication and a lot of addressing symptoms, but never getting to the root. And people going on and on and on years suffering from chronic pain and situations that are, you know, and where that pain translates into old feelings and emotional content, unforgiveness and things that have really impacted our life and our relationships. A lot of ancient sort of past stuff. We'll be exploring with Hygeia all the different facets of the archetype of healing and the healer, and she where she is bringing, because obviously my core belief is that this soul journey is about healing. And wherever we are triggered, wherever we are evolving, wherever we are facing karmic dynamics, where we are challenged or struggling in our life or our relationships, in our career, in our work, in our finances, whatever aspect of our material realm, our incarnated reality, it's, the soul's journey is pointing to that deeper root and that return to source. But then each of these archetypes is offering us an opportunity to evolve into the most healed version of ourselves, into this ongoing. And with Chiron, with the North Node, that is a part of the core calling right now. It's healing the core wounds of the soul, right? North Node in Aries, Chiron in Aries, ruled by that Mars in Aquarius in a new phase to Pluto. This is having the courage to, to be able to face these core wounds of alienation, of not belonging, of where we've been hurt, where we've been outcast, where we, and really coming into our own power and our own medicine, our own courage, our own strength, and becoming the healers that we are. This is why I created this Growing Together group, not just to help people who are wanting to become astrologers and guides and teachers and counselors actualize as themselves, but really because the medicine that we get from doing this work in a collective field, which is why all my class series are intentionally created to have this small group practice where we're witnessing each other, where we're activating that core dynamic. Yeah, and so Eris, the goddess, they call her the goddess of discord, but I really think of her more like the archetype of Kali Ma, right? And Kali Ma is cutting through the illusions of separation, where we think that we can do things that don't hurt ourselves or others. If I'm angry at you, that anger is hurting me, that anger in me, but it's not to suppress or reject or deny that anger, right? The opposition point is Libra. It's to learn how we relate to one another and acknowledge our feelings and our needs, unmet needs and desires being some of the most powerful fuel for anger and disappointment, frustration and challenges. But it's like that illusion of separation perpetuates war and violence and destruction and all these other things that have catastrophic damage. But it comes down as simply to our own soul's journey is I cannot see myself as separate from you. And if there's something in me that triggers you, there's a healing opportunity for both of us when we bring it into relationship. If there's something in you that triggers me, there's a healing opportunity in relationship to myself as I claim responsibility for that trigger in myself, instead of projecting that on you or making you responsible, blaming or right, blame, shame, oppression, right, denial, suppression, all of that, like that square of Capricorn to the Aries Libra axis. We're learning how to relate to one another and to claim our own path of healing as well. And it's a both and. It's happening simultaneously. So, and I'll mention a couple of the other goddesses that I use in the chart on a daily basis. This is Diana. She's also another goddess of Jupiter, a daughter of Jupiter. And this is Hygeia. She's the Hawaiian goddess of fertility and childbirth. She's been transiting through the sign of Scorpio for a long, back and forth. She's in her retrograde motion. She's a slower moving goddess. This is Lilith, the asteroid goddess. I don't work with the black moon so much. I work with the physical asteroid body, Lilith. And this is Chariklo, who is the wife of Chiron, equal and counterpart to her. There's very few people. I mean, the last time that they were together, I think Chiron was in Taurus. They're not so often together in their orbits, but she has a significant relationship to him, and I think carries a very similar vibe of like the feminine healer, the female. And she's been in Aquarius for some time now. This is this one here at 23 degrees Aquarius is Circe. She's a goddess that I've more recently introduced as a part of a study with Demetra George, and that the recording of that class that introduced Circe and Hecate and a few other goddesses is available through the Jeffrey Wolf Green Association of Evolutionary Astrologers from the conference replays. Demetra George did a lecture on these more obscure goddesses, and Hecate is another one that I also incorporate. So all of this will be woven into the fabric of this class over the next several months, and we begin on Friday, March 8th. The way that I've structured the classes, there is a price for the full class series. You can sign up for the full class series. I'm also going to make the individual classes available for a drop-in. So you can sign up to drop in for a particular goddess if there's just one that you want to study and practice with. And, I'm giving in this time period the option if economy or means or the country that you live in, if any kind of economic imbalance, affects your ability to join me, there is an option for you to choose what works for you. If you have the means to pay for the class series and can join me for the entire series, that's of course the best way to get the most value out of this and to really go deeply into each of these archetypes, to be able to witness and practice with it in your own chart, to be able to learn about astrology, but learn about yourself and your life, and be in a container of learning together. If you want to join me and you need support to do that, by all means, please choose it for yourself and feel invited to step into this learning journey with me. I feel blessed to be able to share what I know, what I'm learning. And, it's a great way to orient to the chart from the perspective of evolutionary astrology. With all of these goddesses, I'm always going to be pointing it back to our core soul's evolutionary journey. And so I hope that if you feel the call, that you'll feel invited to join me. And yeah, if there are any questions and you're comfortable, with being recorded right now for your question, or if you, and also for my students, if there's anyone who wants to share their experience of being in a class series with me, what that has been like for you, please feel free to, I'm going to make it possible for you to unmute yourself. And yeah, and and if there's nothing and no one has anything to share, then we'll close this transmission. Yeah.
Well, I'll pop in real quick. Hi. I've made myself visible. I'm out of Michelle. Michelle. Oh my God. I'm one of Michelle's students from both of her the workshops, the containers that she's had this past season. And yeah, I mean, this is kind of per me. I'm a bit overwhelmed with what to say because it's all just it's so profound. Um, I came to Michelle's work arbitrarily out there in the astrology world. And I really felt like I was guided to her specifically, which has revealed itself in the course of working with her. I've been in a really deep place of suffering since beginning with her, and have really felt like the work and the way that she presents the work, the way that she channels love, but the information of the present moment, um, and weaves it in with her own personal experience is very important for me as to have a teacher that really um, is just so open and raw and vulnerable and authentic with her own experience, past and present. And um, that's felt really, yeah, very meaningful to me. And it feels like it also makes the work come alive in a way that I'm able to integrate it and understand it as it pertains to my own life. And in the container as well, with some of the other students, you're hearing their life experiences. And of course, inevitably, there's always some overlap. I'm like, oh, that's happening for me too. So it's cool to learn the astrology in that way.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, after every week ahead that I watch or every class that we do, I have a million things. So now I have a mountain of things that like I need to somehow transmit to Michelle, whether it's through osmosis, I'm not sure. This is beginning, but to me that's a reflection of just like goodness coming through. So I mean I feel like if you're here watching this, you've probably been led to her for a specific reason. So I would just go for it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And just know, I always invite this of my students. There's so much, only so much that I can transmit right in the container of this transmission. And you receive that and you all take that into your lives, like you were just saying, and integrate that. And I never expect you to share that in the container of our classes, but you are always invited to share your heart with me, just to be witnessed and received. And so that invitation is there, to send me an email, to share your experience, share what you received. Um, it's really welcomed. And um, I may not like respond with a lot of like stuff, but it's just there for you to be able to pour yourself out and to know that it's all welcome. So, yeah, thank you so much for sharing your experience. Thank you for being with me. Lynn, please feel free to unmute yourself.
I think I have.
Yeah.
Uh, I just wanted to say thank you. And it's so nice to be with you and actually, have a little tiny bit of a dialogue exchange for the first time because I know that you realize I'm very new to you and your work. And but I've been very affected by it.
Mm.
In very special way. So I just wanted you to know that. And then you mentioned uh, Chiron and Chariclo, and I got all excited because some years ago I took a class with Melanie Reinhardt,
Mm.
and we discovered that I was, in that without dating myself as far as a year. You probably know what year it is, but I have them conjunct at 2 degrees in Sagittarius
Mhm.
um, in my natal chart.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the last
Unusual.
time that they were together.
Yes.
Really. So
Yeah.
it's really,
Yeah.
I have them in the same sign, but not together, you know. And I think it's profound. I mean, I think there's a profound medicine that you carry with that conjunction. And Melanie Reinhardt, by the way, is just like one of the most dear. If you don't know her work, or She is one of the most dearest souls and on this journey with Chiron and her, yeah, I cannot recommend her enough.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you. She's dedicated most of her career to it, hasn't she?
Yeah. And we did for the association, we did a conference, and one of the classes was taught by Jason Hawley on Chiron.
Mhm.
And Melanie signed up and came to the class, and my heart
Oh,
was so deeply touched by
yeah.
witnessing her loving presence there. I mean, like, talk about somebody who's really walking with this archetype so deeply. And yeah, yeah. So thank you. And thank you for showing up. I've noticed your comments on my videos, and I appreciate your heart and your presence so much. And I just really, yeah, grateful for you to be here.
No, well, I'm honored to be with you. Thank you, and I look forward to getting to know you more.
Thank you.
So, um,
All right.
all righty.
This is such a beautiful, you know, moment in time in our evolution. And just in closing, I'll say, um, that are evolving these archetypes invites us to discovering a part of ourselves that may have been hidden from us for many, many lifetimes. But at least in this lifetime, if you don't have to believe in past lifetimes in order for this to apply, in this lifetime, the more we reclaim these parts of our souls, the more we become empowered to live authentically, to be ourselves, and to love one another. And that is my core intention with this class series, with all the work that I do, with everything that I share. And so I really do invite you to join me in this series. If there are questions that you have, I'll be sending out the replay to this recording to everyone who signed up, and posting it on my YouTube channel so that you can, rewatch or re-listen to anything, and sending out details for joining me for the series. We begin on March 8th. Classes will be on Fridays once a month at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. All time zones are welcome. I know that for some people this is late and, all of that, but at 11 a.m. seems to be the best time for me to be able to reach most time zones. And yeah, thank you so much for joining me. Really honored to be able to be here and serve your souls and your journey. And I hope that something from this blesses your life, and that you take it out into your day and enjoy the rest of your beautiful day. Bye for now, my friends.